So we are going to look at a love passage out of First John. So First John, in my reading this week, I was noting a lot of people think that First John is kind of a letter commentary on the Gospel of John, kind of for a new generation. You know, when he wrote it, he was still, youngish man, probably later than the other Gospels, but First John is likely written at kind of the end of his life. He's an old man and he wants to kind of connect with the younger generation, kind of reinterpret John and point out some of the important things. So one of the big themes, and obviously the Gospel of John, and this one as well, is love. What does love actually mean in a biblical view? And I think, kind of the classic sound bites, the stuff they'd be quoting and putting on Facebook from John is, of course, the quote, "God is love." That one gets quoted all the time. People recognize that one. Another one from First John gets people like is, "We love because God first loved us." John puts a lot of special emphasis on kind of that greatest commandment of Jesus, love God and love others. And I think just that amount of phrasing around love begs the question. When that word gets thrown around so much in our culture, what is love? How would we define it? Our culture is pretty happy to define it for us, right? But when we say God is love, something that's thrown around a lot, I'm not always sure that phrase means the same thing in the Bible that it does for us. And so the section we're going to look at, I think, is actually answering kind of two questions. One is, what is love? According to Jesus, according to John interpreting his life. And then, of course, the question is also, so what? Okay, great. We define love, so what? So I think those are going to be the kind of two questions that I'm going to have. And I'd love us all to have at the back of our minds as I'm reading this. What is love according to the Bible? And so what if we define it? So I am in First John. I am in chapter 3, starting at verse 16. Good, easy one to remember, right? John 3:16. Except it's, of course, First John 3:16. So this is how we know love. Jesus laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. But if a person has material possessions, sees a brother or sister in need, and that person doesn't care, how can the love of God remain in him? Little children, let's not love with words or with speech, but with action and in truth. This is how we will know that we belong to the truth and reassure our hearts in God's presence. Even if our hearts condemn us, God is greater than our hearts and knows all things. Dear friends, if our hearts don't condemn us, we have confidence in relationship to God. We receive whatever we ask from him because we keep his commandments and do what pleases him. This is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love each other as he commanded us. The person who keeps his commandments remains in God. God remains in him. And this is how we know that he remains in us, because of the Spirit he has given us. So let's take just kind of a second to unpack a few things in there. This is how we know love. Jesus laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and our sisters. So the image there is of biblical love, of how John wants us to define love, is not a strong feeling. It's not a strong feeling of attraction, whether that's to a person or our, favorite song or a favorite type of food, right? Think about the way we use love. Oh, I love nachos on Sunday night. I love it. We use the word very loosely. We say we love people, or I love that thing, and then we're over it a week later, right? Strong emotional attachment is not love in the biblical sense. I don't think God's against that by any means, but let's not mistake it for love. Love is about laying down of life. And so I wanted to start us out with just kind of a quick reflection on this is how we know love. Jesus laid down his life for us. Think for a second about all the ways that God continually lays down his life. I ran into kind of an interesting kind of speculative idea recently that said God was actually in this pattern of laying down his life even before he created the world. And the idea was something like this, like, okay, if God is complete, if he's whole, right? How does he even make room for other things like the world and his children? Does God even need to empty some space out of himself to make enough room for us to exist? It's kind of an interesting thought. So their idea was, even in creating the world and creating materiality, creating all of us who had our own free will, God was in fact laying down his life. He was lessening himself in some ways for our sake. Kind of interesting idea, but I'd throw it out there. Less speculatively, I think we can say pretty clearly from reading the Bible and the Old Testament, loving the world, loving humanity, allowing them to become sinful if we so choose and continually so choose. There's a lot of laying down, there's a lot of ache God introduced to his own heart that he didn't have to, right? He loved us enough to give us the true freedom to choose him or to choose other things. And he has paid the price again and again and again. Think of how many people God has depended on in history and trusted and gone into relationship with that have just broken his heart again and again and again. You just hear those passages in the Old Testament. You hear that great passage of Jesus' metaphor. I long to lift up my wings and let you run under them and cuddle you. What do I have to do? I cannot do any more for you than the things I'm constantly doing. If you would just come back to me, I would love to forgive you. I would love to do it. So I think just loving us, even if God wasn't intending on doing anything about it, right? There was an incredible laying down of his life in giving us freedom and letting us break his heart again and again and again. But it doesn't stop there, does it? Jesus also came and took on weakness. He took on physicality, the need to eat food, the need to sleep at night, the need to be, or the possibility of being poor, of being misunderstood, of being beaten, which he experienced. You know, he took on all these things, including distance from God, all those things that we're looking forward to in heaven, and the wholeness and the joy that is there. He gave those things up. He came for us rather than sitting back in his glory, in his own comfort. He laid that down. Even by being born, I think there was an incredible loss on his part. And it doesn't stop there. His life was defined by, I think, loss. His life was defined in so many ways by laying it down. Jesus, who knew everything, who created the world, did not roll into, Rome, where there's power. He didn't roll into Athens, where his wisdom maybe was appreciated. He rolled into a backwater place with poor and downtrodden, and he spent his time and his energy and his love on the worst of the worst, the traitors, the tax collectors, the prostitutes, those who, in everyone else's eyes, made him dirty and fall behind, right? He lived a life defined by laying down his life. He didn't want to be impressive, although if there's anyone who had a chance to claim it, it was him, who knew what he was doing, who could see left and right how we should be living our lives. And he let it go. He laid it down day after day after day to the point that he ended up on the cross, right? The cross, I think, is the logical conclusion of loving the world and what our relationship with God traditionally looks like. Why did he do all these things? Because he loves. Because that continual self-denial, that continual sacrifice is how God defines love. It's how John defines love. And so his kind of strategy in this book is saying, okay, look, if this is how he defines love, this continually being so much about other people, whether it's appreciated, whether it's grasped and enjoyed, he's about other people. He's about serving. If we're going to say we love him and follow him, what does it look like for us to follow, to lay down our lives? That language, I was thinking, is laying down our lives, sacrifice. I think we have a few places in our culture where we use that language. A lot of the time, you think about, after soldiers are killed, or after, a first responder, a fireman's killed in a fire, or, a policeman is shot. Think about the language around that we always use. They gave the ultimate sacrifice. They showed their service to others. And I think in our culture, this is held up as like the ultimate form of serving others and taking care of other people, right? It's this pinnacle. It's this way of showing how great you are. And I think what John is trying to do in passages like this is saying, yeah, when our culture that is considered the highest good, the highest goal, this is the ultimate example that very few people are capable of living into. And I think John is arguing in our culture that may be a high pinnacle, maybe a rare thing. But in the beloved community, in the church, that type of self-sacrifice, that type of dirt is not just living into death. Although John would have seen that by that point in his life, right? He has seen martyrs. He's seen people killed for loving one another. But that's not supposed to be the pinnacle. That's not supposed to be this thing for saints and really special people. It should be everyday self-sacrifice, love. It should be ordinary as dirt. People willing to sacrifice. Why? Because that's what God did, and we are trying in our own small, pitiful, self-centered ways to imitate, to lay down our lives, just the same way he has. And so that sounds really nice and abstract, but like I said, defining love is just the first verse here. And the rest of this, I think, is him trying to help us be practical about it. Okay, what does that actually look like for self-sacrifice to become normal and daily in this community? So the first example he gives us is in verse 17. But if a person has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, and that person doesn't care, how can the love of God remain in him? Little children, let's not love with words or speech, but with action and truth. And so I think there is a lot of kind of discussion right now and acknowledgement of the disparity in the world, even the disparity in our culture, right? And I think we can kind of throw up our hands at times and say, I don't know how to do that. I don't know what I'm supposed to do about the unfairness of the world. And I think that those are questions worth engaging, but I don't think that's where John starts. He's not starting with the grand problems of fixing disparity and justice. The Bible does talk about those. But I think he starts way more practically than that. He just says, look, if you have material possessions, that's us, right? We have material possessions. And we see a brother or sister in need, and we don't care. Can we say the love of God is in us? So by brother and sister, again, I think this is a pointing out, these are people we know. These are people that we're actually involved with, specifically in the church community. But I think, Jesus pointed out all our brothers and sisters. And so the question for us is not an abstract, are we curing poverty? Are we making things right in the world? Do we see the everyday people around us? Do we assume it is our responsibility to take care of the needs we see there? Because how can we say the love of God is in us if we don't even care? And that's what he brings up, right? If you see this thing around you, if we have some stuff, we see need around us, and you don't even care, how can we say we're self-sacrificing? How can we say we're showing love like those things? And I think taking it out of like the grand realms of these big things gives us little different eyes, right? When we're looking around, we are going to say things that we're going to feel overwhelmed by. But I think if we're looking at that smaller level, looking for brothers and sisters, just those people around us, and we see needs, we see little stuff, we're like, oh yeah, well, I can do that. And I think we're often willing to do that, right? And I think those little sacrifices, those little laying down of ourselves, those opportunities that God is providing for us is how we begin practicing. Because again, John is talking about self-sacrifice, laying down our lives. He knew people who were martyred. He'd seen that. He would be martyred himself not too much longer. But I think his approach is that he'd been practicing, right? They'd been using these little self-sacrifices, taking care of brothers and sisters, caring, taking care of the people. They've been building and practicing, so the point came when someone was laying down their life, making that ultimate sacrifice in our culture. It made sense. That was the logical conclusion of a life lived. Actually, probably a young man who knew John, who was killed in kind of that next generation. One of the next leaders in the church is this guy named Papias. There's a real famous story of his death. And he died as an old man. He'd been serving the church for many, many years, and they came to arrest him. They found out he was here, and the soldiers said, "Hey, you're an old man. We don't really like this. It makes us look bad. If you're willing to just deny it publicly, you don't even have to believe it. Just deny this, that you follow Jesus publicly. We'll let you off the hook." And he has this great quote. He says, I've served and walked with Jesus, and he's taken care of me every day for 70 years. Why would I change that today? And sure enough, they did end up killing him. But I just think it's amazing in the Christian community that these little things are what builds him up to the point you can say at the end of his life. He's just kind of like, he's taking care of me every day for 70 years. Why would I back down from that now? And I think it can be easy looking at passages like self-sacrifice to the people doing this and saying, well, maybe if I'm put in that situation, who knows what I'd be made of. But we practice it little ways. Right now, we just see a brother or sister in need. You can probably think of a neighbor. You can probably think of a coworker, whatever. Some tiny little way to show, give up something we want. Make it be about them. And we're living this way, just like they said. We are showing the self-sacrifice, the love. We are practicing to be growing in that in the culmination. 19 and 22, I think, is great because as I was looking at this passage, my heart just immediately went to guilt, right? Like, oh, I should be doing that so much more. I wish I was doing that more. I wish I was a better person. I'll let the rest of you teach this. You're all so much more spiritual than me because you probably are doing this already. And John just knows people, I think, because he says this, let's love in words and speech, but with action, not with words and speech, but with action and truth, right? And then he jumps right into saying, look, this is how we know we belong to the truth and reassure our hearts in God's presence. You don't get to be guilty. Even if our hearts condemn us, even if we feel bad about it, God is greater than our hearts and he knows all things. Knock it off. Quit making it about you and how you're feeling right now. Friends, if our hearts condemn us, or I would say if they don't, we have confidence in our relationship with God, not in the stuff we're supposed to be doing. We receive what we ask from him because we keep his commandments. We do what pleases him. Knock it off. Quit feeling sorry for yourself. Quit feeling guilty. We have confidence in our relationship with God. We know he asks, he gives us what we ask for. And I think in the context of this passage, say, God, I don't know how to love. Could you help me do that? I don't know how to not feel bad about what I do. Could you help me with that? And the answer is yeah, of course. Of course I can help you do this. I'm the one who came up with this stuff. I'm the one who lived this. Draw from my strength in doing it, not yours. Trust my relationship with you. Don't listen to your heart, even when it's yelling at you and condemning you. Trust me. I'm the one who empowers you, not you. Trust me. And at the very end, we get these verses 23 and 24, which a lot of people pointed out. There's this word, remain in me or abide in me, depending on your translation, comes out of there. Almost everyone says, yeah, this is like a shorthand version of John 15, right? The vine and the branches. He who abides in me will draw strength from me. And so that vine and the branches, I think, is behind these last couple of verses. This is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his son, Jesus Christ. We love each other as he commanded us. The person who keeps his commands, that loving command, right? That not listening to our guilty hearts, the loving it with action command, that person, they remain in God. God remains in them, like that vine and the branches. And this is how we know he remains in us, because the Spirit given to us. Again, if God himself is living in us, he is going to be the one giving us the strength to abide, to draw our strength from that root. We are simply the branches. We are not the source of that strength. We are not the source of fruit. We are the conduit. And how do we know, whether we feel it or not, that this is what's happening in our lives? The Spirit is in our lives. So let's trust the Spirit, not our ways of feeling, not our definitions of love. This definition of love is very simple, but it feels above us. I can't do that. I'm not good enough. I'm not big enough a lot of the time. And he says, abide in me. That's the Spirit's job. This thing is going to happen. Trust. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. My Spirit rests in you for a reason. You are going to be capable of loving in the exact same way I did, not in strong feelings, in self sacrifice. Why? Because I showed you how. I pioneered the path, and my Spirit is with you, carrying you along the way. You've got this. Not because you feel up to it, not because you're trying really hard, but because my Spirit's with you and I said you can. And so the love chapter here, I think, is reminding us that love has to do with laying down what we want all the time, but it's also about trusting when God says, yeah, you can do this. You can be capable of it because my Spirit is on you. You can abide in me. You can remain in me. You can do this thing because I say you can. Is that enough for you?